See, this is our answer, regulation of respiration. As Ritika just told us, see, the respiratory centers are situated in pons and medulla oblongata. So in the pons, we have pneumotaxic center and apneustic center. And in medulla, we have dorsal group of neurons and ventral group of neurons. And the information is conveyed via which nerve, Ritika here? Vagus nerve. Yeah. Okay. Yesterday you asked me chemoreceptors, baroreceptors. That also we will see today, not a problem. Okay. Now see here. Now the dorsal group of neurons, chiefly the respiratory centers, they are situated in medulla. No, we'll start with dorsal group of neurons. So these dorsal group of neurons are diffusely situated in the nucleus of tractus solitarius, what we have seen in the brain stem. Okay, then the type of neurons are inspiratory neurons. This pink area, these are, whenever this area is stimulated, okay, what happens? The ramp of inspiration is starting. See, the chemoreceptors are taking the information to the dorsal group of neurons. That means the chemoreceptors are present at the bifurcation of common carotid artery and arch of aorta. These chemoreceptors will read the chemical changes in the blood. That means whenever carbon dioxide levels are raised in the blood, you will see this carbon dioxide will it will cause the triggering of dorsal group of neurons. Okay, so inspiratory neurons are stimulated, and always this center is very active and it is responsible for the production of this inspiratory ramp. Okay, and it has autorhythmic property, like we have systole, diastole is autorhythmic. Similarly, even dorsal group of neurons, they are inspiration followed by expiration, it is like autorhythmic. Now, after studying about dorsal group of neurons, we also see next group of neurons, which are ventral group of neurons. They are situated again in the medulla oblongata, and the nucleus ambiguous and retroambiguous. They are both inspiratory and expiratory neurons here. They are inactive during quiet breathing and they become active during forced breathing. Okay, so apart from this, we also have the other centers situated in the pons. These are pneumotaxic center and apneustic center. In fact, the pneumotaxic and apneustic center is also included in this form of table beta in the latest books. Though here we don't see table for this, but of course we can read it from here, same thing. So apneustic center is this blue one. So it is situated in the reticular formation of lower pons. So it increases depth of inspiration by acting directly on dorsal group of neurons. That means apneustic center will go and it will just stimulate dorsal group of neurons. So dorsal group of neurons will increase the depth of respiration. Okay, beta, that is. Now, experimental evidences we don't require. The next last, the highest one, what you are seeing in red color in the upper part of pons is the pneumotaxic center. So it is situated in the dorsolateral part of the reticular formation of the upper pons. It is formed by medial parabrachial and subbrachial nucleus. Okay, one name is enough. So function is to control medullary respiratory centers, particularly dorsal group of neurons, which are inspiratory in function. That means, see here, if you just look at this arrow, you will understand. Initially, pneumotaxic center is stimulated. This will go and stimulate apneustic, and apneustic center will go and stimulate dorsal group of neurons. And we know dorsal group of neurons are inspiratory in nature. Okay, beta? So this is all about the function. So this pneumotaxic and center increases respiratory rate by reducing the duration of inspiration. So now the information of low oxygen content is carried by a vagus nerve, and apneustic center is stimulated and it goes and stimulates the dorsal group of neurons. They are all interconnected. Okay, that is. So we have efferent pathway and afferent pathway. Roughly speaking, like efferent pathway and like nerve fibers from respiratory centers leave the brain stem and descend in the anterior part of the lateral columns of the spinal cord. That means lateral spinothalamic tracts leave the brain. That means these are motor tracts. Okay. So these nerve fibers terminate in the motor neurons of anterior horn cells of the cervical thoracic segments of spinal cord. That means they are controlling the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm and controlling the movement or contraction of these muscles. Okay, that is efferent pathway. Okay, so that is through pyramidal and extrapyramidal tracts we will see the distribution of these nerves to diaphragm and intercostal nerve fibers to the intercostal muscles. Okay, vagus also contains some efferent fibers from the respiratory centers. Now, respiratory centers, they also receive information via afferent nerves, no? So from peripheral chemoreceptors, baroreceptors via glossopharyngeal and vagus nerves. Okay, we know these nerves only will carry the information to the brain. So stretch receptors of lungs via vagus nerve. Okay, that is. Apart from these centers, now we are also asked this one. I hope you remember Hering-Breuer's inflation reflex. I told you this is a protective reflex which prevents the overexpansion of the lungs, which will not allow the lungs to expand beyond normal range, and it will protect the lungs so that the lungs are not bursting. Okay, lungs are like balloons only, no? No, so when inspiration is taking place because of the stimulation of dorsal group of neurons, you will see tidal volume is, if it is more than 1000 milliliters, the stretching of lungs and the stimulation of stretch receptors, that means the information is now going to dorsal group of neurons through vagus. Already so much of air is there in the lungs, so the dorsal group of neurons are inhibited so that there is no inspiration. Okay, so this protective mechanism is nothing but Hering-Breuer's inflation reflex. Okay, beta. So this was all about this answer what we just studied. Okay, then dysbarism. Okay. What is dysbarism? Meanwhile, try to recollect better. See here, the next question we have is, it is from deep sea physiology. So in deep sea physiology, see what is generally we see in movies like they keep the underwater water breathing apparatus and they breathe through the breathing apparatus. No, that is nothing but self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. That's what is scuba. So that scuba apparatus, what does it contain? It contains oxygen along with some other gases like nitrogen. Okay, why we need to keep nitrogen? Because the pressure are in the water and the pressure of the breathing apparatus should match, should be equal, then only the oxygen will enter into the lungs. Okay, so gradually we see the person will be going, see this is sea level, that means gradually he is going down into the sea, 33 feet, 66 feet. Okay, he will be like no signs and symptoms will be seen, person will be happy only. See here, as the person is going down into the sea, 100 feet symptoms of nitrogen narcosis appear. Okay, that means see 133 feet, atmospheric pressure is like 500 mm of Hg. Person will not have any concentration. He becomes jovial and careless. That's why he still tries to go inside 166 feet, where the atmospheric pressure is 6 mm of Hg. He starts feeling drowsy. If he still goes down 200 feet, okay, from sea level, then it is 7 mm of Hg is the atmospheric pressure and he feels fatigued, weak and careless. Suppose still he is going deeper into the sea, 233, like atmospheric pressure should be 8 mm, then he loses the power of judgment, unable to do skilled work. That means he will not be able to come back also. 266 feet, you will see atmospheric pressure will be 9 and he becomes unconscious. Okay, so that means now the question is decompression sickness, that means dysbarism. This is the question which is asked. That means person has gone deep into the sea, and now in order to rescue the patient we also should not drag him immediately from this feet. Immediately the pressure was 9, you cannot immediately take him to 1. Suppose if you should gradually allow the body to acclimatize back to normal. Few minutes he should be exposed to 8 mm, then 7, then at least for half an hour period. Gradually the person has to be brought back to the atmospheric pressure. If all of a sudden, if the person is brought back from 9 mm of Hg to 1 mm of Hg, air bubbles, those nitrogen gas and whatever helium combination we use in scuba apparatus, those gases will enter into the blood circulation and it may cause air embolism. Air bubbles will enter into the blood vessels and those air bubbles will block, they may block the cerebral blood vessels causing hemiplegia. They may block anywhere. If it is blocking coronary arteries, it may lead to myocardial infarction, that is heart attack. Okay, now let us see what is dysbarism. So decompression sickness is a disorder that occurs when a person returns rapidly to normal surrounding atmospheric pressure. He should not go like he should be allowed to gradually come back. Okay, from the area of high atmospheric pressure like deep sea, it is also known as dysbarism, compressed air sickness. Okay, Kaizen's disease or diver's palsy. Palsy means paralysis, what the diver got who has entered into underwater sea. So high barometric pressure at deep sea leads to compression of gases in the body. So compression reduces the volume of gases. So among the respiratory gases, oxygen is utilized by the tissue, carbon dioxide can be expired out. But we know we have used nitrogen in the apparatus, which is present in high concentration. 80% is an inert gas, so it is neither utilized nor it is expired. So when nitrogen is compressed with high atmospheric pressure in deep sea, it now enters into blood vessels. It enters the organs. As it is fat soluble, it gets dissolved in the fat of tissue and tissue fluids. Okay, I already told you everything but bubbles, embolism, that only I am reading now. As long as person remains in deep sea, nitrogen remains in solution and it does not cause any problem. But if the person is ascending fast, is coming back rapidly and returns to atmospheric pressure, then dysbarism occurs, decompression sickness occurs. Due to sudden return to atmospheric pressure, the nitrogen is decompressed and escapes from the tissues at faster rate. Being a gas, it forms bubbles. Okay, so the bubbles travel through blood vessels, ducts. These blood vessels will obstruct the blood flow, causing air embolism, leading to decompression sickness. Okay, so that is. So symptoms of dysbarism are like nitrogen gas is present in tissue, no? So it causes severe pain, particularly in joints, myelin sheath of our sensory nerve fibers, numbness, tingling, pricking, paresthesia, itching, temporary paralysis due to nitrogen bubbles in myelin sheath of motor nerve fibers, muscle cramps. Occasionally, if it is coronary artery is blocked, I told you, no, but a coronary ischemia, it may lead to heart attack also. Any part of the blood cardiovascular system may be blocked. It may be in the brain and spinal cord also, leading to paralysis. Okay, because of the obstruction of blood vessels by these nitrogen gas bubbles. Dizziness, paralysis of muscles, shortness of breath, and choking occur. Finally, fatigue, unconsciousness, and death. Then, how to prevent this? I already told you. We should bring the person back to atmospheric pressure gradually. Don't rush thinking that he became unconscious. No. If we rush again, there will be dysbarism. Okay. So it's prevented by proper precautionary measures. While returning to mean sea level, ascent should be very slow with short stay at regular intervals. I told you at least half an hour we should allow that person to be exposed to that gradual atmospheric pressure. Okay, stepwise ascent will allow nitrogen to come back to blood without forming bubbles. It prevents the decompression sickness. Okay. So if you suspect the person is already suffering with decompression sickness, so recompression should be done. So it is done by keeping person in recompression chamber, then is brought back to atmospheric pressure by reducing pressure slowly. Hyperbaric oxygen, that means you are giving like oxygen under high pressure so that the nitrogen is displaced, removed. That's what is called as hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Is that clear, Ritika?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hearing viewers, disparism, then vital capacity. This paper, have you seen continuously CVS questions, continuously respiratory questions? Like that it is framed. I wonder.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Vital capacity and its functions. What is vital capacity, beta? How much is the vital capacity? Okay, here we have vital capacity. The maximum volume of air that can be expelled out of lungs forcefully after maximal or deep inspiration. Okay, after deep inspiration, suppose whatever maximum volume of air that can be expelled out is nothing but vital capacity. So vital capacity, like how is it measured? It is nothing but inspiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume plus expiratory reserve volume. So you should give definition of each of this better. So what is inspiratory reserve volume? Amount of maximum air which can be inspired. See, additional volume of air that can be inspired forcefully at the end of normal inspiration. Okay, that is inspiratory reserve volume 3300. Okay, after that, what do we have? Inspiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume plus expiratory reserve volume. So, how much? What is the expiratory reserve volume? Additional volume of air that can be expired out forcefully after normal expiration, it is 1 liter. Okay, so inspiratory, then tidal volume, so it's the volume of air breathed in and out of the lungs in single normal quiet respiration. Okay, so tidal volume is how much? 500. So you are just making a total of tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume plus expiratory reserve volume. 500 plus 3300 plus 1000. So these three together will make vital capacity. Okay, you have to elaborate inspiratory reserve volume, tidal volume plus expiratory reserve volume. Okay, so this is 4800. Okay, beta, now you should know the variations in vital capacity. So in females, vital capacity is less than males. Obviously, it is slightly more in heavy built person, more in standing position than in lying down. It's more in athletes. It is decreased in people with sedentary life, and it is increased in person who play musical instruments. That means those who consume more air while singing, while playing instruments like bugle and flutes. Okay, pathological variations. Vital capacity is like decreased when all these respiratory disorders like asthma, emphysema, paralysis of respiratory muscles, pulmonary congestion, pneumonia, pneumothorax, hemothorax, pyothorax, hydrothorax, pulmonary edema, and pulmonary tuberculosis. Okay, so vital capacity is measured by spirometry. We have seen this
Ma'am, what is
experiment.
pyothorax?
Which one, beta? Pyo is pus, hemo is blood,
Okay.
hydro is water. Okay, pyo is pus.
Okay, ma'am.
If you remember, I have shown you this spirometry experiment also when we were doing chapter wise respiratory system spirometry. Ah, okay, we'll see again if once that question comes. Forced vital capacity. So for this answer, we have to talk from here. Vital capacity till here. You should talk about better. Okay. Forced vital capacity is a separate question. which is also called as timed vital capacity. That also we have discussed, but again, once that question comes, we will discuss. Then composition and function of dash. What is this, beta? Can you correct this wrongly spelt word? Succus
Succus
entericus.
and
What is succus entericus?
intestinal juice.
Very good. Intestinal juice. What does it do? Helps in digestion of different types of foods, isn't it? So, do you remember the composition of succus entericus, beta?
No, ma'am.
At least, like any other juice, it also has water, minerals, and many
Water.
enzymes. Okay, what may be the various enzymes we have? Generally, carbohydrate digesting enzymes will be amylases. No,
Amylase.
protein digesting enzymes are
Pepsin.
pepsin, trypsin, chymotrypsin. Very good. And fat digesting enzymes are lipase. No,
Lipases.
very good. So that only you will study under succus entericus. So see, this is pancreatic juice, stomach. After stomach, where did he give? Intestines. Where did he discuss? Beta? Liver, gallbladder. Yeah. See here, succus entericus. So as we said, it has proteolytic enzymes, amylolytic enzymes, and lipolytic. Protein digesting, carbohydrate digesting, and lipid digesting enzymes it has, right? So you see here, you have to give this composition. Water 99.9, solids, organic, inorganic. Just give the list of these enzymes. Okay, inorganic, all like minerals, whatever you remember, you can write those names. It also has intrinsic factor which helps in the absorption of vitamin B12. So, in order to elaborate and write, just follow this table better. Peptidases will digest peptides to amino acids. Sucrase will digest sucrose to fructose and glucose and so on. Okay, that is all about digestive enzymes, succus entericus. Then GFR, glomerular filtration rate, cystometrogram, gastric emptying time. What is gastric emptying time, beta? Functions of pancreatic juice also is asked simultaneously. We'll see this first before going because chapter wise questions will be done. Pancreatic juice composition function is also easy, no beta? Like same thing like we have seen intestinal juice, it will be similar. You have a flow chart showing the pancreatic juice composition. This is the pancreatic juice composition, water, solids, and so on. Okay, proteolytic, lipolytic, amylolytic enzymes. After this, you have to talk about this table better. Each enzyme, what is the activator? Like suppose like proteins are converted to proteoses and polypeptides in the presence of trypsin, which is activated by enterokinase and trypsin. Okay, like that you have to frame the sentences. One more question has come, no? Gastric emptying time. Obviously, how much time does the food stay in the stomach? Usually 2 to 3 hours, isn't it? So the time taken for the contents of stomach to move from the stomach to the small intestine is gastric emptying time. So, I think it is a general question or specific. Let us see if any heading is given here. Structure of stomach wall. gastric emptying time is nothing but the time taken for the contents of the stomach, the time taken from the entry to the exit. Entry is from esophagus and exit is towards small intestine. Okay, usually it will be 3 to 4 hours. Okay, then after this we have renal system. In that GFR is asked. What is GFR? Glomerular filtration rate. No, so this also we have discussed only, but still factors. Actually, factors affecting GFR we didn't do in detail. No, Ritika, we stopped there because of some emergency. I told I will be discussing later.
Yes, ma'am.
GFR. Yes, beta. See here. Here we have glomerular filtration rate. I think in this chapter only we have. Okay. I think we'll go first to cystometrogram. That is also one question. So what is cystometrogram? Cystometrogram is we are just measuring the amount of urine inside the urinary bladder. That's what is cystometrogram. Okay. So in case of cystometrogram, what you are seeing is this is the volume of urine which is filled up. Okay, and the pressure which is developed inside the urinary bladder. Suppose if the volume of urine inside the urinary bladder is 400 ml, the pressure inside the urinary bladder is 20 centimeters of water. Suppose your class is going on and you could not go and attend your toilet and washroom, then your classes started and classes are continuing and you didn't get permission to go to washroom at all. Then you will see the pressure in the urinary bladder will start building up so bad as though you will get pain, isn't it? So see here. So like volume is now increasing 500 to then 600, then 700. You will see the pressure is increasing up to 50 centimeters of water. So the measurement of the amount of urine inside the urinary bladder and the how much pressure is developed inside is nothing but cystometrogram. Okay, that is. After that, GFR we will see, beta. In which chapter GFR is discussed, beta? I think first few chapters.
I don't remember.
Uh, yes, this is right. Yes, this one. Glomerular filtration rate. So it is defined as total quantity of filtrate formed in all nephrons of both the kidneys in given unit of time. So how much is normal GFR? 125 milliliters per minute. That means how much amount of urine, like blood is passing through nephrons per day. 180 liters of blood. We don't have so much of blood also. We have only 5 liters. No, that too in 65 kg healthy adult. That means the blood is flowing through this glomerulus so many times that it is making 180 liters per day. Okay. So that is glomerular filtration rate. So what are the factors regulating glomerular filtration rate? The more the flow towards from the afferent arteriole, we have network that is glomerulus. The outside is efferent arteriole. The more the blood enters into the glomerulus, the more the pressure developed here and the more is the filtration. That is renal blood flow. That is very important, okay, which is directly proportional. Then tubuloglomerular feedback, for which we have a flow chart beta. So when suppose if GFR is high, so we know like we have PCT, Henle's loop, DCT, collecting duct, right? So increase in the sodium chloride concentration in the renal tubule. We have that, do you remember we have juxtaglomerular apparatus where we have macula densa cells. They are concerned with the release of this local hormone adenosine, which causes constriction of afferent arteriole. Constriction means closing. Suppose if afferent arteriole is closed, do you think blood will be entering into the glomerulus? Blood flow in the glomerulus will be reduced or increased, Ritika?
Reduced.
reduced. Very good. So decrease in glomerular blood flow. Obviously, if blood flow is less, amount of filtrate which is formed, is it less or more?
Less.
Less. Obviously, urine formation also will reduce. That's why GFR also will reduce. That is something like a self-control beta. Tubuloglomerular feedback. Tubules are continuing whether to bring about afferent arteriolar constriction or afferent arteriolar dilatation. Okay, that is the second factor. After this, so we have, see, factors increasing, like we have this, no, vita macula densa. Other chemical substances are also given in this paragraph. Other than adenosine, we have thromboxane, prostaglandin, E2 hydroxy, ecosa, ecosa tetranoic acid. Okay, like that. And decreasing the sensitivity, we have atrial natriuretic peptide, prostaglandin 1, cyclic AMP, nitrous oxide. Other factors, glomerular capillary pressure. If capillary pressure is more, GFR also is more. Just try to focus on these words, whether it is directly proportional or inversely. Colloidal osmotic pressure. So if this pressure is more, that means oncotic pressure which is present inside the blood vessels, which is contributed because of plasma proteins. Albumin, globulin, prothrombin, fibrinogen. Those plasma proteins only will maintain the colloidal osmotic pressure. Suppose if osmotic pressure is high, GFR will be low, and vice versa. That means it is inversely proportional. Hydrostatic pressure, already if pressure is more water is there in Bowman's capsule, that will stop the filtration of the capillaries. That means it is also inversely proportional. Constriction, we know it is also inversely promo. If the afferent arterioles are constricted, the sieve becomes impermeable, isn't it? So GFR will reduce. Okay, constriction of efferent arterioles, initially GFR increases, but later on then it will decrease. If blood flow is high, then you will see basically GFR also will increase, because more and more blood will be pumped towards the glomerulus initially. Again, after that you will see there will be a self control mechanism. Then we have sympathetic stimulation. Afferent and efferent arterioles, they are supplied by sympathetic nerves, and stimulation of the sympathetic nerve does not cause any significant change in GFR. Okay, if it is strongly stimulated, it can cause constriction. So whenever constriction is there, GFR is reduced. Okay, surface area of capillary. More the surface area, more is the filtration.